Staying, I think, quite an exciting session that we're about to have. My name is Rudy Dix. I'm the head of the Project Management Office in the Presidency. I also work with an exceptional team, the Just Energy Transition Project Management Unit, who have been in the forefront of developing what we're just about to speak about, which is the investment plan. I have an esteemed panel, of course. Let me just welcome Honourable Minister Barbara Creecy, the Minister for Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. Joanne Yawich, which leads the project management team in the PMO. Commissioner Mbodi, well-known commissioner and representing largely labour interests and a very active participant and of the Commission. And then, of course, Mr. Cascovadia, who is from Business Unity South Africa. The running order will be just to ask Minister Creecy to provide a few opening remarks. We'll then move into Ms. Joanne Yawich presenting the Just Energy Transition Implementation Plan. And then, of course, we'll have Commissioner Mbodi and Mr. Kovadia commenting. Just an apology for Lucano, as you would see, is the rep that's missing on that seat over there. He may be joining us late, or he will be joining us late, as I understand it. So please forgive that. He's actually at another panel right now and will be joining as soon as possible. Without any further ado, Minister, I mean, just a quick, if I may just say, I mean, this has been an exciting journey, Minister. It started way back in 2021 when you had announced the nationally determined contribution, our ambitious range that was there. Of course, what then happened, if I recall, and that was my first meeting dipping into climate and just energy transition. And of course, we had an engagement with what was then, which is now referred to as the International Partner Group. That set into motion a whole series of negotiations on an offer that was made. And from there onwards, we concluded a political declaration, which was announced at COP26, on the sidelines of COP26 at the Leaders' Summit. We embarked on a development of an investment plan, and today we're having a conversation on a very important and historical milestone again, groundbreaking, the implementation plan that sets into motion very specific areas of focus. So it's been an exciting journey. It's been a difficult journey, right? And I think as South Africa, South Africa always embarks on these journeys which are quite challenging, but at the end of the day, we think that we've got together something which is quite important to mobilize the whole of society, to partner with various institutions, organizations, and countries out there. And it lays the basis for what we think is quite important, and that is implementing a just energy transition that is bottom-up, that mobilizes communities, that mobilizes workers, that mobilizes business, and that partners with government in the delivery of what is going to be quite an important journey for the next few years. So with those opening remarks, Minister Creecy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rudy, and let me acknowledge my fellow panelists, our IPG partners who are here today, and of course all of you ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here at the South African Pavilion this morning. It's really good to see all of you. As you say, Rudy, this journey began in 2021 when South Africa decided to lodge with the UNFCCC our revised nationally determined contribution to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Our NDC is a range. The top of the range is compatible with the 2-degree temperature goal, and the bottom of the range is compatible with the 1.5-degree temperature goal. And when we developed this NDC in consultation and with the guidance of the Presidential Climate Commission. We did so first and foremost because South Africa believes in the science. The sixth assessment report was not yet out, but we already knew that our country is warming up at twice the average global rate, and that already we are beginning to see the devastating effect of climate change, not just on lives and livelihoods, but on our economy as a whole, and also, of course, on built infrastructure, on agriculture, on human health. And we understand, you know, very often when people talk about climate change, they talk about ice sheets. I mean, I actually had the privilege in January this year to see the ice sheet. So I now know what an ice sheet is. But for most of us, we're not clear what an ice sheet is. But we are clear that we've had floods, which killed 450 people in KZN last year. We are clear that right now our country is going through a heat wave, and we understand that the United Nations is telling us that 2023 is the hottest year on record, and we're experiencing these extreme weather events ourselves. So I'm saying this because since the journey began, many people have said to me, where does this NDC come from? Why are we being dictated to? So I think it's important to say that South Africa believes the science. South Africa believes that we need to do our best efforts to contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The second issue that I would want to raise is that this implementation plan that you're going to hear about today is based on justice. One of the great injustices of our time is that those who have contributed least to greenhouse gas emissions are in fact going to be most severely affected by it. The future generation who is growing up at the moment. An example of intergenerational injustice. The global south and the African continent in particular that has contributed less than 2% to the accumulation of the greenhouse gas emissions that is creating the current climate crisis. Women. And this beautiful mural, which we don't really have time to tell you about today, has been created by the Keiskammer Women's Collective. And it's about how climate change is impacting their lives and about their vision for what they would like to see the future of South Africa look like if we implement our climate change policies appropriately. So the concept of justice in this implementation plan is that those who are going to be affected by the transition must be directly consulted, not via, but as individuals who will be affected. Included in this plan is the idea that justice means that the alternatives can't be top-down, they must be co-created. And that when we talk about alternative livelihoods, those who will experience those livelihoods and enjoy those livelihoods must design them and benefit from them. And lastly, included in this plan is the idea of restorative justice, which means that if we're going to embark on a journey to achieving a green transition, that transition must help us with unemployment and poverty and inequality and energy security and all the things that South Africans want for a decent life. We must not have to choose between meeting climate objectives and meeting our sustainable development goals. And so the third point I want to make is that you would now see that this is a South African plan. It's a South African plan that says we will transition at a pace and at a speed that is compatible with our national circumstances and that we can afford without taking on undue burdens for repayment of debt for future generations. And it is a South African plan that will help us with our South African developmental challenges and the creation of decent life and decent work and decent opportunities for South Africans. And so, inherent in the plan is optimism. Optimism that the climate crisis doesn't just pose challenges for us, but what it also poses for us is opportunities for growth paths, for shared prosperity, and for employment. And finally, what the plan tries to do is to enshrine the concept of financial transparency. Up front, we will have a register of all the money that has been collected and what is the form of that money, what is grants and concessional and not so concessional and all those complicated financial things that very often we don't understand when we sign on the dotted line. But more importantly, we will answer the question that South Africans want to know. What projects are going to be financed? How much financing is there going to be? And what is the accountability mechanism? Many people have said to me, how do we know this money isn't going to be stolen? I'm a believer that sunshine is the best form of disinfectant. And so we will ensure that these projects are in the sunshine, where all of you can understand them, all of you can monitor them, and all of you can make sure that they are used for what they're intended to, a better life for South Africans. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister. Perhaps I didn't mention earlier on, and I wanted to, Minister, to say that. But this plan that Joanne is about to present, the implementation plan, would not have happened without the able political leadership and guidance that Minister Creasy had provided. Difficult task, providing us guidance, providing us leadership. Minister Creasy, of course, heads what we refer to in South Africa an interministerial committee of ministers that are all involved in the space, making sure that they're able to contribute. And of course, this has been a fundamental, important area that as the bureaucracy, as we, as the technical team have done the work, Minister Creasy has provided the most important political leadership, that's it. So I would want to give another round of applause. It's not been an easy task, as I said. The second point is that, so we've jumped ahead already. So if you go on what is referred to as www State of the Nation, one word. We've already uploaded the implementation plan. We've already uploaded the documents, including the full register that's there, Minister Creasy. So we've done that in the last 2 or 3 days. And again, our full commitment to transparency, to ensuring that information is readily available and that we will be able to answer questions. With no further ado, let me invite Joanne to take us through the implementation plan, and then we'll have the panelists engage on that.
Okay, I'm not going to. Okay. Is there a problem?
No, there's no problem.
Hi. Morning, everybody, and it's wonderful to see such a crowded room, and to see so many of our IPG partners in the room, but also just looking around, so many of of the organizations and the people who participated in the consultations, helped us to do the technical work, gave input, commented on elements of the plan here today. Let me show you. Here is the implementation plan. We don't have hard copies for everybody. In fact, Rudy has explained. You can find it on the website. But this document is really a collective, it's the outcome of a set of collective processes, and I think it represents the thinking and the views, I am hoping, of a very broad cross-section of South Africans with the support of our partners. So I'm going to take you through a presentation that is going to tell you what is in the plan. I am going to spend a fair amount of time on the first part of it. I'm going to race through the middle bit, leaving it for you to look at online and the detail of it online. And then I'll talk a little bit about the specific sector proposals that we are making. Now, I hope, okay. So, all right, so we want to give you an executive summary of the plan. We'll answer questions. And really, we'll talk about some of the way forward issues. So I think importantly, we need to reaffirm our commitment to the just energy transition. I see all kinds of stuff on social media about asking questions about whether South Africa is backtracking. Are we delaying? Is this not going forward? Are we not sufficiently committed? And the answer to all of that is no. And I think that Minister Creasy spoke to that. So firstly, the JET really is our commitment to decarbonize the economy based on the financial support being provided by developed countries and in line with the NDC, and the Minister explained the way that that works. We remain committed to forging ahead with our transition plans. And really, it's a long-term switch to a much cleaner energy economy and a low-carbon and climate-resilient society. Importantly, we're going to have to manage this transition at a pace, scale, and cost that is consistent with our socio-economic development path, needs, and affordability. And that is critical, and it's critical in a country with a constrained fiscus as well. The Minister has spoken, and in the session before there was a lot of discussion around what justice means in the context of this plan. It is at the heart of it, and we've got to ensure that distributive, restorative, and procedural justice must be experienced by the people who are affected by the transition, and must be at the forefront of driving the transition to benefit the communities, workers, and other stakeholders. And in many ways, and I'll explain a bit later, this plan I see as a move from development and consultation to co-creation, participation, and hopefully ownership by the people who are affected by it. And I think we've learned a lot along the way about what that actually means. I think you start off making mistakes and you learn and you move forward. So I think that's an important part of it. Then I think we need to acknowledge the progress that has been made in advancing the JET in the last 2 years. I think the stakeholder engagement in itself starts to build consensus and starts to build traction. But I think the broader context is of the far-reaching reforms that government has instituted in the electricity sector, which are unlocking large-scale investments in renewable energy. We've also seen an increase in both the scale of the IPG partnership as well as in the pledges that have been made. And then obviously the approval of this plan by the South African Cabinet, I would add, after an exhaustive process of discussion. I think importantly in our commitment, it is important to say that the issue of higher levels of grant funding remains critical to us, and particularly in the context of the JUST. as well as the need to secure highly concessional finance to be able to implement the plan in the way that we would want to. And then there is a commitment to put in place the monitoring and evaluation framework that will ensure the transparency that the minister spoke about. Okay, so moving from the JET investment plan to the implementation plan. When the president handed a year ago, just over a year ago, the investment plan to the Presidential Climate Commission, he asked the PCC to hold public consultations on the JET IP, and I really do want to acknowledge the incredible role that the PCC played in taking up that instruction and supporting us to spend most of the first quarter of this year talking to a very wide range of stakeholders to try and get their views on the investment plan. And then so that in the development of the implementation plan, we could understand stakeholder views and adequately incorporate them in the way forward. So let me talk a little bit about the consultation process and what the key messages were that we got from stakeholders. This is by no means everything, but I think it is kind of, in summary, the key issues that arose. Firstly, on just transition, there was a very strong message that a sharper focus was needed on justice for communities and workers. And we've tried to find ways to do that in the plan. That more consultation was needed in order to prioritize projects and resource needs. And we hope that we are going to put in place a mechanism that would achieve that. I think the issue of pace was a critical concern. And I think that in the approval of the plan by Cabinet, that has been reiterated. On financing, I think two things. Firstly, transparency is necessary regarding loan conditions. I think there was a lot of anxiety about, is the country taking on a debt it can't afford? And then the issue that we've already raised around the need for much greater grant finance and highly concessional finance. There was a strong call for investments in the JET finances to support investments in the transmission grid. Very strong views that the work that we originally did on skills was highly inadequate, and we agree and we hope we've redressed that. On the municipal sphere of government, there was a strong view that there was a need for more granular and participatory planning to address the energy transition planning at municipal level. And I think a very strong support for the focus on distribution and upgrade of distribution networks in the original investment plan. On green hydrogen, we've had a lively and ongoing debate, in particular with the NGO community, about whether green hydrogen is an investment priority, given all the other energy needs. I think our conclusion is that it is, but I think there are important questions about the way that that industry unfolds and the benefit that it will or won't bring to communities and workers. On electric vehicles, very strong views that we've got to, in the rollout of an electric vehicle sector in South Africa, that priority has to be to protect workers in the automotive industry, that we need to industrialize the battery manufacturing value chain, and we need to prioritize public transport in the rollout of electric vehicles so that it just doesn't become something that supports wealthy people to drive one in a car. On socioeconomic outcomes, a focus on people wanted to see our plans for job creation, localization, community ownership of renewables, where we've worked significantly with the PCC on that, support for black business and energy access, in particular, the rollout and support for renewables by poor communities. And lastly, a very strong view that implementation must be transparent and accountable, and we'll talk about the M&E framework. In addition to these consultations that were run in the first quarter of the year, we also convened a whole set of focus groups of experts to test and to give their views on the issue. So to recap what is in the IP, I'm not going to dwell on this. The Minister has spoken about the NDC, which is set out on the left. We took an approach in developing the investment plan that we weren't going to look at an 8.5 billion pledge at that stage, that we were going to look at South Africa's scale of need. We assessed it at around 1.5 trillion rand over a 5-year period, and that finance would need to be mobilized by a very wide set of sources, including, importantly, the private sector, both domestically and internationally. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, we set out the sectors in which we have tried to develop what we're calling jet portfolios. We are going to add to those a bit. We've also got a portfolio that speaks directly to the issues in Mpumalanga. And at the bottom of the slide, I think that what we've tried to set out is the way, the kinds of socio-economic outcomes and the sustainability considerations that would inform the way that the just energy transition is carried out. So moving on to the plan itself. Firstly, this plan is a roadmap or roadmaps that will enable us to take targeted strides towards meeting our decarbonization commitments in a manner that delivers just outcomes for those affected and that contributes to inclusive economic growth, energy security, and employment. There are 6 portfolios that are set out on the left-hand side of the slide. I'm not going to read through them all. I'm going to go through them in a minute. And what we've tried to do is to define short and medium-term outcomes. In the 6 defined portfolios, we've tried to build an institutional and governance set of arrangements that will ensure that that process is driven by identifying key institutions to lead this work and by capacitating those institutions. And the role of these structures, institutions, they're going to take different forms for different portfolios, is to co-create solutions with stakeholders in specified planning work streams. They will be asked to align and prepare programs and projects, mobilize financing, drive performance, and monitoring results. Then out of the public consultation and the consultation with experts in the coming year, we are going to do further work on three more portfolios. Firstly, the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan that the DMRE is spearheading is reaching finalization. And we would want to look at how the JET financing could support the implementation of that. So that's the one new portfolio. The second is on energy efficiency, which is something that we mentioned in the investment plan but didn't deal with in nearly enough detail. And there is enormous experience in South Africa, but a long way to go. So we'll deal with that. And then the last one, particularly in the context of our current logistics crisis, is to look at how the JET financing can be used to support road-to-rail initiatives and decarbonization in the transportation sector. So we'll do that work going forward. Okay, so just to talk a little bit about developments in 2023, and I'm going to talk through this and then actually skip the next slide, but the slides are available. So the first important thing that I've spoken about at length is the feedback we received from stakeholders during the consultations. Then I've also spoken about the policy and regulatory reforms, particularly in the energy sector, but also other things like the passage of the climate change bill through Parliament that gives a set of institutional and planning requirements, both across government and across society more broadly in relation to the way that we govern climate change action in South Africa. The ESCOM debt relief package that the Minister of Finance announced in the budget this year has resulted in some of the assumptions that were in the investment plan no longer holding. In particular, there always was an assumption that a fair degree of the concessional finance would be directed, that ESCOM would be the borrower. But under the debt relief package, ESCOM can't borrow for the next 3 years. And given the country's constrained fiscus, there isn't an ability to issue the headroom for the issuing of sovereign guarantees is much narrower than it ever was. And so that has, in the way that we've done the work, has made us look at innovative and off-balance sheets solutions to financing the electricity infrastructure side of the plan. I've spoken to the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, and then in 2 slides' time, just to look at where we are in terms of the financing status of the plan. Just to say that we have come, firstly, Denmark and the Netherlands joined the IPG. That is wonderful, and they also have made pledges and are involved in many cases in the development of projects and programs. Canada, Spain, and Switzerland have also made pledges and contributions to the JET. And in particular, a lot of effort has gone in both from the partners and from ourselves to raising the level of grant financing in the plan. So there has been a significant, although not adequate, increase in the grant financing, and we are now sitting on a set of pledges in the region of $11.5 billion. So that means $86.5 billion to go. Okay.
We had a bit of exchange rate gain,
Yes.
so it's about under 80.
Okay, then we've tried to build a structure to this implementation plan that will support and enable it. The first is that we've built a theory of change. I'm going to flip through a slide that shows you what it is. But for each one of the portfolios that I've spoken to, we've said, what are the inputs, the activities, the outputs, the outcomes, and the long-term impact that we want to be achieved through the deployment and the use of this JET finance. Secondly, we've built a governance and institutional architecture, which I've explained a bit, but I'll show you a slide that demonstrates it. We have built, the minister spoke to the JET IP projects register. It is a grant register at this point in time. We've worked extensively with the IPG over the last year in order to be able to identify all of the grant finance that is in the package and where it is being deployed, in what sector, who's it's going to, what is the status of that finance. As Rudy said, that is up on, it's the State of the Nation, the Presidency State of the Nation is where you find it on the Presidency website, but that register has been made public and will be updated on a quarterly basis. We hope to build that up into a register around the loan component of the finance as well, in order to respond to the request from stakeholders for transparency on the financing. We are building a funding platform, and I'll go through that in a little bit more detail in the slide. It's a matching facility and a clearinghouse, and then we've put in place a monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework, and there we have worked with the Presidential Climate Commission, the DFFE, the Department of Performance Monitoring and Evaluation in the Presidency, so that what we are doing, as well as with National Treasury, so that our monitoring and evaluation framework sits and is nested in all of the other government systems that that exist. So this is where I'm going to flip through this quite fast. The next slide really shows you kind of what the theory of change is. You can look at it at your leisure when either you go through this slideshow on your own or read the document. On the governance and institutional architecture, just for I want to start from the bottom, because I spoke earlier on about setting up work streams and multi-stakeholder planning, project planning structures that will be run or led by a particular lead institution and that will feed up into the accountability structure of the JET-IP at the top. And here, the ability to bring together the stakeholders on all sides who are critical to execution, to the development of projects and programs, and their execution is going to be central. I've spoken to the projects register. We've just given you a little bit of a look at what it is and the kinds of categories. I mean, it's quite extensive. It includes the priority areas, its purpose, where the money is coming from, the activities it's funding, the stage that projects are at, the amounts of money, who the implementing institutions are, and who the funders are. So kind of something that is really worth looking at. And I think out of it, we've done some analysis, but your analyses would be very interesting as well. For me, the most striking issue was how little of this finance actually goes into project preparation and how much of it goes into technical assistance. I mean, you know, and I think it's a live conversation that we need to be having about, is this grant finance being deployed appropriately? Could we be getting better value out of it? And if so, how and by doing what? So that's a conversation we need to take forward. On the funding platform, we are setting up, and this comes out of our recognition, out of two things. The first, we've spoken about a lot over the last few days and at home, which is that ordinary people on the ground don't see this transition as benefiting them at the moment, and they feel excluded from it. And until that situation changes, and until we put in place the mechanisms, the structures, the processes that will allow people to be able to give expression to the way they see their needs out of a just transition being met, and start to develop the kinds of projects and activities that would support their livelihoods and their futures, we aren't going to really get anywhere. And so this platform will support at the bottom a process of project preparation. We are hoping very strongly that we can work in a much deeper way with labor and with communities, with women's groups, with faith-based organizations, I think a very wide range of organizations and institutions, so that the funders are able to more easily identify investable activities and that the grant funding can get to the right people through the right activities in ways that really allow people to take forward the transition. So whether it's a community renewables ownership project, whether it is a municipal infrastructure project that is going to enable the just transition, we would see this as a clearinghouse that would support it and then would feed into longer term initiatives like as was the just transition financing mechanism that the PCC is developing. I'm not going to stick on this slide at all. It just shows you that we're building an M&E framework. And then I want to talk a little bit about what the key activities are. And I'm conscious of time, Rudy. I'm going to do it in 5 minutes. Yeah. Okay. So in the, I don't know how I'm going to. All right. I'll give you a page reference. These are the electricity programs. So firstly, renewable energy generation and battery storage. Huge focus on grid expansion and grid upgrading, including the distribution network in municipalities. Importantly, front-loading socioeconomic interventions in community developments and repurposing and repowering in areas where power stations are reaching end of life and doing it before we decommission. In Mpumalanga, essentially working with the government to be able to really focus on the just transition interventions and on a future economic and industrial opportunities for workers in the coal value chain and support for the funding around that. Sorry, on new energy vehicles, really looking at supply side incentives. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong slide. New energy vehicle supply side incentives, looking at supporting the component and manufacturing value chain, focus on public transport. I've spoken to the battery industry, as well as looking at how we work better around charging infrastructure. Green hydrogen, there's a whole lot of funding needed for early stage projects and development, a lot of emphasis needed on how communities, the skills base is built for that, how we build the infrastructure and agree on the infrastructure that the country needs to roll out the industry, and then really looking at a much better process of consultation with workers and communities than has happened thus far. On skills, we focused on the skills ecosystem and a combination of building all the interventions that are needed to build an adequate skills base across the tertiary education system, some support for teacher training and foundational basic education preparation, and then the establishment of skills development zones and a series of quick wins. On municipalities, really focusing on the one hand on capability development to enable municipalities to better run and upgrade the distribution network, looking a whole lot of work around finance structuring in the context of a new and upgraded grid, looking at work that we're doing, that National Treasury is doing and that we are supporting around how the free basic electricity grant could be used better in relation to a renewables rollout to benefit the poor. So thank you. That brings me to the end. I hope that's given you a very quick run through, and I hope you're all going to go home and study this. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Joanne. Now, of course, it's not very friendly to the environment that we bring in this thick Bible, but it was meant for the president to hand over to the leaders of the international partner group, so we thought it's just specifically to have a short print run of 50 copies. May I hand over to Mr. Cascovadia, the CEO of BUSA, to perhaps provide the opening remarks on behalf of business?
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Minister, for your introductory remarks and Joanne for the input. Business has participated in the stakeholder interaction and we broadly agree with the plan. I think it's a comprehensive plan that's taken a lot of work and that actually gives us a very clear program and the way forward. Just a couple of points. One, I think as we develop this and as we start looking at real implementation, we need clear implementation milestones, time frames and monitoring, and we need to ensure that we hold each other accountable for this, so that we ensure that we demonstrate that implementation is happening, and it's all of our responsibilities, not just governments. And we keep to the time frame and keep to the path. Secondly, I think the inclusivity is important, and the stakeholder consultation that has happened up to now is critical because this is a journey that's going to have a significant impact on all of society. And we need to ensure that everybody buys into the plan and buys into the way we're actually going to move forward. But we do need to manage this tightly, because I think that sometimes, and this, I'm sure it's the experience elsewhere as well, but let me speak for South Africa, with multi-stakeholder involvement and engagement, sometimes we tend to spin wheels, and we can't afford to spin wheels in this process. We have time frames, there's urgency. The minister talked about the impact we are feeling as a result of climate change, and it is therefore necessary for us to actually move. And ultimately, certainly from a business point of view, through the multi-stakeholder process, we would expect government to lead and government to take decisions as processes unfold and as we reach agreement, and where we don't reach consensus, for government to actually, on the back of consultation, take decisions and move us forward. I think that it is going to be a plan that needs a role from each sector of society, and business is absolutely clear that we will be critical to the plan. We will want to work with government and other stakeholders to ensure that we manage the risks in the plan, but we also optimize the opportunities that we have. And we look forward to making this now real, working together and on an ongoing basis, on the basis of milestones that we agree, ensuring that we implementing and we hold each other accountable. Thanks.
Thanks, Cass. Commissioner Mbodi, I mean, being a former unionist, I'm certain the issues around just component and skills development is at the heart of the fear of many workers, that a transition of this nature generally may pose a whole set of risks or may not benefit workers. It would be interesting to hear your views around what you think on the implementation plan, whether this addresses and the views of workers back home in South Africa. Just give it. Again? Yeah.
But okay, I can hear myself now. Look, we, as a trade union movement, we are not only worried about the shop floor events that connects us to just transition, but we are born and we live in societies. So we connect the struggles of the shop floor and the communities. And it makes sense, because when one loses a job, particularly in South Africa, they are more unlikely to find a job in their lifetime again. So everybody else who gets to talk and argue a case for us must really know the socio-economic challenges that we face as a country. To start with, we don't believe that just transition will be just because we type it as just. The judge and the jury will have to be the poor and the working class, and I don't say this lightly, because the World Bank says about 55.5% of people in South Africa live in poverty. So if you were to ignore that important aspect of our socioeconomics, you're going to have a very big problem. So that is why we agree with the issue of pace, watching the pace. But you can't watch the pace if you're not the one driving. So we do believe that South Africa has to be at the driving seat, but driving. And I want to make an analogy of a driver who knows that if you are driving, you're in charge of the speed of the car that you're driving, which means you know the socio-economic things that are happening around your car. I want to make that analogy to us assessing our socio-economics and say, is our speed justified? And so it won't be justified if the majority of our people that I've already quantified are left outside and they don't understand the concepts. And it is not justifiable that only people in glass offices understand just transition from the beginning to the end, and the poor are wondering, what are you talking about? So I want to emphasize the issue of the speed. The issue of the speed should not really, we shouldn't get excited so much that we forget our people. Number two, we believe there are other existing policies that we cannot overtake and overrule. For instance, if you've got your IRP, Integrated Resource Plan, where it stands if it has not changed. That is basically what you look at. It can't be that we sit here and get excite ourselves out of things that have already gone through processes that are inclusive, of which we also play a role. The issue of the just transition framework, and we do mention that justice is very, very important. Not insofar as only included in talks, being included in talks, because it's easier. You can call people into a hall and tick the sheet. We're talking about involving people in the substance of what it is that is going to have to happen, but not dropping them along the way. You take a journey with them. You don't just take them to the station and inform them of how the journey is, and then you jet off and you go to Dubai. I think it is important that I mention that also, that to those that do not know, we have got a very critical challenge in South Africa, which is energy poverty. Energy poverty occasioned by load shedding. Now, if you are going to talk of just transition, that doesn't also talk of how particularly you deal with that aspect. You are missing the boat. So you are going to, people who are outside the country, and I forgive them if they don't know how our people think. They will tell you that we hear all this good English that you're speaking. We are interested in how we're going to move out of the quagmire of endless load shedding. Not only because they just want to watch TV, but because they get retrenched because there is no electricity, energy. And when they get retrenched, they go into the poverty basket. Already, a large number of people who are working poor, which means they still can't afford the basic amenities, basic needs. So in essence, if you must address things in South Africa, you need to consider seriously the people, put the people at the center. And I know I don't talk lightly when I say we cannot put profit at the center and displace our people and excite ourselves with money, because then we are going to have a problem. Let me move and say the issue of skills is very, very important. But we don't need to do a talk shop on this. It needs to be elaborate and deliberate. We cannot go and just spin the figures, and I heard my colleague here speaking about spinning wheels. We have seen people spinning figures, saying this figure and that figure, which cannot be found anywhere, it is just in their documents. We need to go as pragmatic and as practical as possible, because it is very dangerous for me as a labor rep to go to a general meeting to tell them that you're going to lose a job and you're not going to get it, and all in the name of just transition, and support it. I would take one of you if you think it is very, very easy to do that. We need to go in front of those workers and say, these are the things that are going to happen, and these are the numbers that are impacted, and this is how we're going to address, and this is how we're going to alleviate a challenge. Because I must make this point quickly also, that in South Africa, you've got a province called Northern Cape where there is solar and whatnot. And on the other side, you've got coal in Mpumalanga. When you lose something and it happens to be found in Northern Cape, the Northern Cape people will protect that as theirs and say, but you had coal, we were not there. Now we have got the sun and it's the gold of the day. You mustn't come here. So those things are very, very important. Lastly, the issue of finance. We think monies are very, very important in order to do this, but we do understand the fiscus may not cope to deal with the mitigation, adaptation, and all the other things connected to it. But we do believe that it shouldn't be that we shy away from talking about the increase of grants. We say so because right now, if you look at the debt to GDP ratio, you will see we are hovering above 70, we're around about 70. It can't be sustainable. And again, I want to make this example, and many people laugh at me when I say this, but I will simplify it. Many of the challenges that we're having that connects to climate have not necessarily been caused by ourselves. Global North countries, and I know other people don't like it mentioned, but let me mention that the industrialized and over-industrialization, to a certain extent, led to the problem that we're having. And so this example that I'm going to make is an oversimplification, but it's important. If somebody happens, my son happens to break the window next door, I don't have to go and give them a loan. I don't have to give them a loan. I've got to go and fix. I hope it happens. It's not regional. It's universal. It is impossible that my son will go and break the window and I will say, look, man, I've got a loan with low interest. Probably this is going to help you. I think we need, and I know some of you will say it's oversimplification, but this is how the majority of our people look at it. And as and when we do get these instruments, let's make sure that they are not from one country, they are all over the place, but they are also varied. And also, lastly, that there should be honesty and transparency. No other country should say, don't use coal and give us money, and then they use that coal themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Mbodi. Passionate, as always. This is the passion I always remember from being a unionist. Important energy poverty, energy access, financing, cost of capital, bottom up. And I think this is the importance of us, given what we've learned, for example, on decommissioning of Komati. Minister had an earlier session elucidating that point, that if we don't take communities and workers, women, young people with us, I'm afraid our transition will not be a very happy transition. In actual fact, it will probably run into a dead end if we do not have a bottom-up approach going through to it. Good to see you, Tando, again. I did apologize for you. I'm happy that you were able to join us.
Thank you.
Any comments from your side around the implementation plan?
Yes. First, let me greet everyone, especially the minister as well, and thank you all for joining. I think most of us as South Africans would appreciate the challenge that it takes to develop a document like this because of the nature of how it is that we engage. And so I want to commend as well then the chat team for putting it together. I know it wasn't an easy task. I know we also didn't make it too easy from time to time, but we are here all together in the end. Just some comments from our side is we have seen within the document that our inputs have been taken in, which I think for us is quite important, right? Because it shows that we're a critical stakeholder in the space. I mean, a simple thing, just to touch on some of the comments made by Commissioner Mbodi, is the inclusion of electric vehicles for public transport particularly is something that's key. We've got a large number of people that might not have private vehicles as we do, right? Might not have the certain privileges that we do. As an NGO sector, we're oftentimes as close to many of these communities, more so than private sector, more so than government in many instances, except for local municipalities. And so our work to be able to engage with these stakeholders is quite critical. And so seeing these expressions in these documents is quite key for us. The second issue that I want to touch on is this one of the grants component. We understand that it's not an easy thing to shift, but at least in it being there, it does provide space for us as NGOs to be able to participate actively in the same way in which, or in a slightly different way in which business would and the labor community would. For us, particularly when we look at some of the developmental imperatives, perhaps maybe not reskilling entirely, but certainly how economic diversification happens, how education around just transition, for example, happens, might fall into the remit of NGOs, might fall into the remit of spaces that might not traditionally allow for it, right, because of the scope of some of this work. And so for us to be able to get into these spaces, to engage together with our colleagues is quite important. The third thing that I want to touch on is then we need to keep in mind, and I know that it's not lost on us, implementation for this plan and every other plan will always happen at a local level. We can plan it at a national level, and this is what we have. We can have the engagements that we have at a national level. There comes a time where the doing is going to happen at a locality, in a municipality. And at that place, that is where then, business comes in, local government comes in, ourselves as communities comes in, labor comes in. Now, one of the things that I would want to really emphasize is the need for having a structure similar to what we have at a PCC level, but at a local level. Because what we've learned, at least through the Komati experience, is that as you engage in the implementation of whatever project, challenges arise. And it's not always feasible to say when the challenge arises that let's first go back to national. National sometimes is too far. It's not within that locality. So having some kind of structure in place that allows us to be able to engage with one another, specifically on how to get rid of those impasses so that we can get to the shared end, I think is something that's quite critical. And I think the document or the plan in its current iteration makes very good reference to that. I'll touch on just a little bit of a sensitive one for us, and that's this issue of the hydrogen. And really the issue with the hydrogen is the water. We live in a country that's water scarce. And so for us, and again at this local level, it's the extent to which we can balance the needs of the country and the needs of the people living in that country who have rights to the mineral benefits or the benefits of what the country has. So as we now move into this space, right, and we're talking about the green hydrogen, to what extent can we say, again in these local structures, some of this water allocation is necessary for South Africa to hold its competitive and comparative advantage in the global markets. But at the same time, it's also able to respond to the very real needs of its people so that it can continue to advance in particularly its development imperatives. So with that, the last thing I just want to say is that, what we have for all of its work is a brilliant recipe book. A brilliant recipe book. The proof, though, is the tasting. And now the next stage is for us to really, really get down to it, and we'll then figure out just how great and robust our plan is once we start to do more of these things. Thanks.
Yep, that's what the audience task ahead, Joanne, Minister, is implementing this thing, right? And we've got good lessons to learn. Minister, I wonder if we should just ask the audience and then you respond towards the end, if that's okay? Go ahead,
Thank you very much. I'm Stéphane Crouzat, the French climate ambassador, and I'm really delighted to be here today. I remember 2 years ago now, in October 2021, when some climate envoys came to South Africa, and you were kind enough to receive us, Minister, and we set out the idea that we should come up with a JETP. It became a reality at COP26. Then we had the implementation plan. Now we have the investment plan. And so it's really, we've gone so far in this time, and I'm really, really proud that we are part of that journey with you. Minister, you said at one point in your introduction that no country should have to choose between development and the fight against climate change. And that, of course, struck a big chord with us, because it's exactly what we have been saying in the 4P, the Paris Pact for People and the Planet, and that is the first pillar of this pact is precisely what you have articulated. The second pillar is that every such initiative should be country-led. And here you have shown in this presentation that it is really nationally country-led, the government having spoken with business, civil society, unions. So it's remarkable the way you have embarked on this journey. And the third and the fourth pillar of the Paris Pact for people and the planet is that we need to unlock finance. We need to unlock public finance. We've trying to do our bit in this JETP with the 8.5 billion, and we need to unlock private finance. And it's not at scale for delivery of what is needed. And that's one of the reasons why our president came up with the Coal Transition Accelerator Initiative, which he presented with other leaders a few days ago during the leaders segment. we need to incentivize the private sector to invest in coal plants, not to have them go on with these coals, but in order to decommission, to repurpose, to retrofit these coal plants. And this is it's a huge challenge, of course, for South Africa. And we hope that with this commission that we're going to set up, a coal transition commission, in order to reflect on how we can incentivize the private sector to really embark on this journey of decommissioning coal plants. How can that be helpful for South Africa? So it will be another step. Thanks.
Thank you, Stefan. Absolutely amazing. We've been on this journey. You ma'am?
Thank you. My name's Katrina. I'm from Wits University. I wanted to ask a question about whether Eskom will be directly getting any of the money, given what was said about the barrier around National Treasury. Will Eskom get any money directly? And if not, how will Eskom access that funding? And then secondly, would you agree that what we're seeing and what is being advocated for is essentially a privatization of our electricity sector, given that Eskom is no longer able to invest or build any generation capacity, and that there is increased planning for private sector engagement in transmission? Thank you.
Thanks. And then I'm going to ask Mayor Pakate.
Thank you very much, Rudy. My name is Tola Pagati from the South African Local Government Association. Two things for me. The first one is the issue related to institutional arrangement for the implementation of the plan at the municipal level. One of the panelists, and that needs to be tightened up. The second one is the issue of revenue loss at municipality as a result of the transition. So my view would be that transitional mechanisms should be made such that they don't lead to revenue losses, as you know that the formula for the financing of municipality is based on municipality reticulating electricity and water and other services to communities. So those are the two issues for me.
Let's take a couple of comments. Minister Joanne? You want? Oh, you don't have?
Okay.
You want?
Hello. Am I audible? Yes. Thank you. I want to deal with the issue that Commissioner Lebodi raised about the difficulty of engaging in this transition in a context where we have very high unemployment and we also have severe energy poverty and energy insecurity. I think that if we look at the Komati case study, I think the best thing one can say about that case study is the reason you have a pilot is so that you don't make your mistakes in society in general. Because that case study does not inspire confidence. I think that the evaluation which the Climate Commission did of that case study indicates that we failed on every aspect of justice. We didn't consult properly, we didn't co-create, and we didn't deal with restorative justice. And we are in discussion at the moment with the relevant partners to say that it's terribly important we put that case study right. Because if you don't do that, it's going to be very difficult to convince people that anywhere else you go, you're not going to make the same mistakes. But I think, Commissioner, what we've learned from that case study is that you've got to front load the alternative livelihoods. You can't say to people, as you point out, there's a place called the Northern Cape, we're going to wait for 7 years, there'll be some green hydrogen jobs there. What are people supposed to do over the next 7 years? So I think that's a big learning that we had is you have to front load the creation of the initiatives before you start with the job losses. And I think what's very important to say is in Komati, the job losses were not of the ESCOM workers who were transferred elsewhere. But what we didn't look at was the whole ecosystem that was dependent on that power station. So that's the second learning, is that it's not necessarily the direct jobs, because those are highly skilled workers, somebody will want them. The question is, what happens to everybody who's involved in the ecosystem? What happens to the women that are running the chisanyamas? What happens to the people who are doing the maintenance on the power plant? What happens to the people that are driving the coal trucks? So I think that is a second learning. And I love your analogy about giving your neighbor a loan to fix the window your son broke. I'm going to use that in the negotiations. I love that. And I think that President Ramaphosa has been very articulate that we have to raise more grant financing. And obviously, if you're talking about things like energy generation, those things have a revenue stream because you're going to sell energy. But if you're talking about reskilling, if you're talking about taking first loss on new enterprises, if you're talking about developing and empowering small cooperatives that can be co-owners in new ventures, those things require grant financing because there isn't going to be a revenue stream for them. So I think that we fully agree that we've got to go on fighting for a greater share of grant financing. And that issue is part of the broader battle in terms of the UNFCCC. Because, as you all know, finance is one of the big sticking points in the negotiation, because new, predictable, at-scale sources of finance are what are going to be required for the global transition. Joanne, I'm leaving you with the difficult ones.
Okay. All right. Should I start with
ESCOM and the municipal capacity?
Okay. Yeah, municipal. Let's start with municipal capacity and debt. And thank you, Mayor. We agree that there is quite a lot of work that is needed in order to agree on the institutional arrangements. And I think it requires further conversations with SALGA. It requires conversations with COGTA. It requires quite a lot of work that we are going to need to do together. And I think that is the important thing, is kind of that we're going to need to get together and say what is going to work best and how are we now going to drive this effectively. And I think we acknowledge that in the implementation plan that further work is needed. On the financing issues and the challenges, you know, I think that firstly, there is work being done by National Treasury to look at the municipal financing system and the ways that in a changed energy system, you've got to look at a review and a rethink of the way we run municipal finances. And I think it is going to, again, be important that we work jointly on this. We've started to collaborate with National Treasury, but there is an ongoing process. And I think it links into a very, very difficult thing for us. And it's a worldwide thing, which is that all over the world, areas of social infrastructure that have been funded by electricity are changing. And so I think the other thing that we need to do is to look at what is the international experience of how other countries have managed very similar problems to ourselves, and see if we can't benefit and learn from some of that. In relation to ESCOM, look, the ESCOM debt relief package is intended, it's a 3-year package that is intended
to put Eskom in a much sounder financial position than it is at the moment. That is why National Treasury took on that debt, because it then allows Eskom to strengthen its own balance sheet in order that it can take forward its mandate into the future. So I don't see this as a privatization at all, but I think that what it does impact is what can be done in terms of Eskom borrowing in the next, it's now almost a 2-year window rather than we almost through 1 year of the 3 years. So I don't know, there is an ongoing set of conversations between National Treasury and Eskom around this. I don't know what the result or the conclusions are going to be, but I think it is important to understand that this is a package for a particular slice of time. It affects what we saw happening in the next 2 years, but I don't think it is intended to kind of be the way that Eskom can never borrow again, that Eskom can never invest again. But I think there is an understanding that Eskom, as a utility, needs to strengthen its balance sheet in the short run in order that in the long run it can do all of those things. But there are sessions. I mean, the one important thing to say is that Eskom is running sessions later on today where it might be useful to, in fact, ask that question of Eskom itself. Thanks.
But certainly, I mean, I think there's a lot of work on investment, both in transmission and in distribution. And we spent quite a bit of time in the chapter around municipalities, around what would be quite critical. So on distribution, remember, Eskom owns about 45% of the entire distribution network in South Africa. The rest is municipalities. So there's certainly an importance about, backlog in significant distribution capacity going forward. I thought maybe just one more point around creating financial options for municipalities in the context of the transition, Mayor Pakati. I mean, these days when one looks at the investments in renewable and where it takes place, and where that energy is being used, that electrons being dispatched. And let's use your municipality, Buffalo City. If you're building, if a developer's building wind turbines over there, it is likely that they're dispatching that in most instances to a buyer or an off-taker somewhere else, somewhere in Ukuruleni. And I think it's important for us to be able to look at it from what are the opportunities for revenue generation? And wheeling tariffs is exactly the way that you need to do that, to be able to look at alternative sources. We're engaging, for example, with NERSA, we're engaging with DMRE around developing a wheeling framework, but it's quite important for municipalities to use that as an ability to be able to financialize and get an alternative source of revenue through the wheeling framework and developing specific sets of wheeling tariffs where generators are using your distribution network to dispatch the electrons across the grid. And I think it's quite an important thing to be able to develop capacity and to work with municipalities to go that forward. Dr. Kitsentami?
Barry Kisnasamy, Department of Health. Just another focus. Everything has been, there's a whole lot of sectors that are affected by climate change. I'm going to concentrate on a micro input with climate change, heat stress, and workers. We've got a large formal sector, but we know historically from mining, heat stress has been a problem. But we've got agricultural workers and a large component of people on the informal economy. And I'm glad you raised the issue around the spaza shops working on the street corners. So what we are making, and when we get back to South Africa, because I've been now at the WHO meeting, and we were here at an Asian Development Bank meeting on climate change and health. So climate change and resilient health facilities, climate change and patients, new vector-borne diseases. We've rolled back malaria, but as we heat up, we'll end up with the vectors coming in. So there's a whole range of issues, and the health sector provides 5% of global emissions, incinerators, laundries, and there's footprints. So we'll get back. I was grateful to just be here for 2 days. In terms of the JET, doesn't just look at the physical infrastructure, but also the people infrastructure, and we're making a special plea for JET and workers, JET and communities and patients. Thanks.
Thank you very much, for this. Finally, the implementation plan is here. I'm from India, and I'm heading one of the research centers called India Just Transition Center. We are deeply working with state governments as well as national governments across board labor unions. I have been engaging also with the PCC, but I have a question because this is a 5-year implementation plan which is very much at the national level. And Mpumalanga has the concentration of coal mines and power plants, but how does the plan integrate local level planning? Because clearly those are more focused plan that needs to be developed and implemented within this time frame of 5 years. And is it an year-on-year plan that, you know, local, say a region or a province will develop based on the national plan? And how that local financing will be released by the national government? Because in India, one of the biggest concerns we have is states are asking for direct financing, and most of it has been routed by the national governments. So if you can just give us some understanding on the synergy between the two.
You'll start. Do you want to start or yeah? Okay, let me try.
Your mic is working. Just leave that.
Is the mic working? Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, thanks for that question. We have Mpumalanga as a province is working to put in place a new economic diversification plan for the region that focuses on the coal belt and that looks at the opportunities of looks at the existing economy, looks at how that could be built, looks at what a coal phase out over a period might mean, and looks at the opportunity for new industries. That is in development. And I think that that plan, together with the plans that ESCOM puts in place as a key industry, the plans that the mines are putting in place in that area are going to need to be brought together into one to build a transition plan for Mpumalanga. The Mpumalanga Premier's office has taken on a coordinating role in this. And there is a capacity that is being built in the Director General's office in Mpumalanga that is working with us, but also working with local government, as well as with a wide range of stakeholders in the province. And that is putting together, building a coordination infrastructure that will enable then a regional plan for the just transition to be put in place and to be taken forward. What hasn't been settled, I don't think, is the question of exactly how the financing of it would flow. So there is work to be done there.
So before I hand over to the minister to... last one. We're running out of time. I'm sure you're competing with next door.
Hi, I am Tara. I'm from SAFC, Southern African Faith Communities Environmental Institute. I had a question around, currently we have 2 bills with the National Council of Provinces, the Climate Change Bill and the Upstream Petroleum Resource Development Bill. And you talked about, setting up a kind of a conducive framework for this implementation plan. What hurdles do you envisage in the event that this, the UPRD does actually go forward, does become an act? I guess this is a question to maybe between the two of you, Joanne Yawich and Minister Creasy.
Your speaker does work, Minister.
Yeah. Let me start with the question from the Department of Health. I suppose the Just Energy Transition Implementation Plan is all about, in climate speak, what we call mitigation. So how do we contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions? But even in a 1.5 degree world, there is going to have to be significant adaptation. And that's where issues that pertain to how are we going to deal with the impact of climate change on human health and human food security and animal health and animal food security are going to become major issues. So those issues are the mechanisms and the framework is enshrined in the Climate Bill, which is before the National Council of Provinces at the moment. So I guess that's something that we would need to discuss with you. And I'm really pleased to know that health is worrying about these issues because it's going to be major. I think that the way we deal with all emissions is in terms of the nationally determined the indices. So every sector of our economy, through the carbon budget mechanisms, will have emission reduction targets. I suppose what the oil and gas industry will need to think about is currently oil and gas is in the energy mix and it's in the mobility mix. And the question would be if there were to be significant oil and gas fines, whether those fines can be exploited within the windows that exist. But they would need to be guided by the sectoral emission targets.
Thank you, Minister. Perhaps just before I ask you to close, I kept it for last. Stefan and Reina also, thank you for joining us over here. I think it's quite important, and sometimes we don't acknowledge sufficiently the partnership that we developed and the relationship that we built with the International Partner Group. And that's been quite an important, sometimes very difficult negotiations, tough. We sometimes lose the diplomacy, but that's how negotiations is. But I think it's been quite phenomenal on this journey in partnership with the French government, Reina Barker, who has been quite central in advising the German government around this, the European Union, the United Kingdom, the USA, and of course our newcomers, the Danish and the Dutch. And this has been quite an important and phenomenal exercise, lots to learn from each other, understanding and developing this partnership. So I also just wanted to say in conclusion, thanking our international partner groups for being with us, supporting us. Lots of talk still, lots of pressure still, as you've heard. The President is eager to wanting to push up the grant component and the grant funding. And we'll be in those conversations as always. Our partnership is not a partnership simply for a year or two or for 5 years. What we're doing is entrenching a partnership for the long term. So we're on this bus. We have to be on this bus together, and it's part of our relationship and building a strong partnership that I think is going to be quite important. We know also that being the first and in developing an investment plan and of course now an implementation plan, there are many other partners that are quite eager to wanting to join us. Others have expressed their support. The Spanish, for example, the Canadians, for example, have been quite eager in supporting, not necessarily joining your international partner group, but on the evidence and the basis of a credible plan, we think that mobilizing international resources and funding is going to be important. So thanks to you also. Minister, do you want to just say the last few words in closing?
There's nothing I can say that you haven't said, so well done.
Oh. Thank you so much.